Hello and welcome to episode 63 of Bits and Pieces. Today we have a very special guest, a cricket journalist, a writer, and author from Australia. Peter Lalor was born in 1827 and was an Irish Australian rabble rouser and later a politician who rose to fame for his leading role in the Eureka Rebellion. This was indeed the moment that commenced modern Australian democracy as we know it. So we were all totally non-surprised that Peter Lalor, after all these years, got to preside over a great democratic procession in presence of the world's in the world's largest democracy, the free and fair democracy. Only last week in Ahmedabad, he lasted from 1827 till last week, and later even got to sit on the Modi mobile, mobile, and verify that democracy is indeed in safe hands today. Wait, hang on. I think ChatGPT served up the wrong bio for Peter Lalor when I typed that in. So it's better to ditch AI and go for what one knows already, hey? Peter Lalor, welcome to the Bits and Pieces podcast today.
That was very amusing. You know, people say that was the birth of democracy, but it was miners' rights, wasn't it? I mean, they were miners. You know, yeah. I'm not a big fan of miners these days. They were more likable in those days. But
so, Peter is the chief writer for The Australian and has been writing as a reporter and a columnist for over 30 years. He writes about non-cricket stuff too, but mainly he writes about cricket. His book in non-cricket books, his book on the Sydney Harbour Bridge is a fantastic read. Peter is a Sydney sider, and because this is the world's friendliest podcast, we will forgive him for it. And I really don't know how Gideon Haigh, his co-traveler, copes with Peter's love for Sydney. But that's
I'm a Victorian originally. I was born in Bendigo. And educated in Melbourne. In fact, I learnt the ways of the world in Melbourne, and I came to spread the faith up here in Sydney to try and correct a few of their mistakes. I taught them how to make coffee. You know, I taught them what a good cafe is, what a good beer is, and how to dress in black. I'm still spreading that faith.
Black, yeah. You've got 2 converts already on this point.
You crossed over
13 black T-shirts I counted in the drawer yesterday.
There you go.
Nice.
But seriously, I mean, when you talk about Sydney, why does Sydney get the New Year's Day pink test? It always rains there at that time of year. Maybe we'll explore that in the podcast too. Peter has also written a beautiful biography of my AFL footballing hero, Ron Barassi. Being a Melbourne fan, that book on Ron Barassi was absolutely a fantastic read. Aussie Rules legend. He's also written a biography on Philip Hughes. I think you co-wrote that one.
With Malcolm Knox. Yeah.
That's right. Again, a wonderful read, leading to the events, I guess, that sadly led to his demise and really did change cricket itself in so many ways. We should explore that too. He's also written a book on beer. I'm definite we will explore that as
Michael Beer.
Good one.
Good. Peter, normally our intros go for about 30 minutes and we talk about cricket, mostly nonsense, for about 10 minutes. But today
good. I might go and get a beer while you're doing the intro.
we'll stop the intros here and then with a simple welcome. This is a friendly podcast, and we'd like to explore many things. One of the reasons for inviting Peter to this podcast also is, Peter, you're a massive Indophile. Honestly, though I think you mask that liking sometimes in your writing. We'll explore that too. Would be worth picking that thread as well. You've been traveling to India, Peter, as a traveler, as a backpacker, and then as a journalist for over 30 years, I think. And you remind your Twitter audiences of that quite regularly as well. So many threads to explore in this conversation.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be here. Gideon spoke very highly of you. You had him on a few weeks ago, didn't you? I know he enjoyed it.
Yeah. We did too. Yeah. So Peter,
this is this is the first Bits and Pieces with an index before we get into the entire podcast, which is great. At which point Nitin is also putting up his index finger saying, "You're out more."
Like all good umpires.
Go for it.
I just wanted to say, Peter, you must have probably got a sense of what this podcast is about already. In case you didn't, when we were talking about the original Peter Lalor, by the way, it's Lalor or Lalor?
It's Lalor. You've got it right.
Lalor.
Unlike most,
Lalor.
unlike most.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we spoke about the OG Peter Lalor, we mentioned miners, and you said you used to like miners and you don't like them so much anymore. That's because those miners all grew up and became adults.
Oh,
That's the sort of humor that features on Bits and Pieces.
Yeah.
So just to give you,
I
dear.
thought you were going to go with Peter Lalor's definitely not batting from the Adani end, like miners.
Yeah,
And
that's it. Yes, that was the mining
Oh, yeah.
connection, wasn't it, during the fourth
Yeah,
test?
mining
The
connection.
Adani
Indeed.
end, yeah, the south end. And Reliance used to have the other end, but they've taken their advertising down. I don't know what's going on there with the Ambanis.
Isn't it called the Geo end now?
Yeah, something like that. It's certainly
Which
not
is-
called the Reliance
is
end
still-
anymore.
Geo
Yeah.
is still a Reliance company, so it's just called
Yeah.
the Geo end. Yeah.
Yeah.
somewhere between Ambani running India and Adani's running India, we all grew up, which is what we want to say. Yeah.
It's been a rather recent phenomenon, wasn't it? When I first visited India, it was the Tatars running the place, I think.
Indeed,
wasn't it?
yes,
Is that
indeed,
how you
indeed.
pronounce their name? Tata.
Yeah, yeah.
They built
That's right.
a magnificent hotel down on the waterfront.
Indeed, yes.
Weren't they?
right.
They were Gujaratis too, weren't they? They were Persian traders, I think, weren't they?
Not Gujaratis. though.
Parsis, yeah.
Parsis. yeah.
Parsis.
Parsis,
Sorry,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Peter, so we'll start with some observations on the Ahmedabad test and of course the series itself. But what did you make of the Modi chariot? Let's start with that.
The joyride on.
The joyride.
All,
of the chariot.
all I could think about was how jealous Scott Morrison must be. You know, he was so close. And you kind of drive. I mean, you drive around all of India, and you realise that Morrison's an amateur. You know, with all he's sort of resident photographer doing photos of him pretending to put up a chook shed and pretending to cook an Indian curry. But boy, oh boy, Modi has got that down pat, hasn't he? It's every 5 meters is a photograph of him doing things. I think he's on every street corner, every billboard, backs of auto rickshaws. So it was kind of nice to have the culmination of that sort of Modi phenomena on the first day of the test. It was a spectacle to behold. I wonder what was going through Elbow's brains. Elbow's only lived 4 blocks from my house. He's a Marrickville boy. Didn't really expect to see a Marrickville boy going around that open top car with Modi. That was a interesting display. I know I was reading Ramchandra Guha on it the other day. He was talking about the shameless narcissism of it. It was good. It was interesting to watch it up close.
Yeah. In a stadium named after himself. But
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if you know of this anecdote involving Bharat Sundaresan, right, from your Australian press pack.
I've heard of him. It's a long-haired guy, isn't he? Yeah.
So he had to show his vaccine certificate to get into a ground or into an airport. And he showed his vaccine certificate, which of course has Narendra Modi's picture on it. And the security guy didn't let him. This is not you, clearly. Like, there are a billion of us, and all our vaccine certificates have the same picture. So
now, one cynic told us, and I think it's partially true because I could confirm it with what I saw, that the only civic project that doesn't have Modi's photographs on it is the sanitization project, the toilets. And guess what they've got? They've got old mate Gandhi's glasses.
Gandhi's
So
glasses,
basically,
yeah.
Gandhi's been requisitioned to the toilets while Modi takes the front of house stuff.
Do you know
brings
why
me-
ScoMo should be happy? Because there is this sort of meme going around, which is that whoever Modi's welcomed or hugged has lost the next election, whether it's Donald Trump or Jair Bolsonaro or any of the other
that's
sort
true.
of.
That's
Well, Morrison got ahead of the curve, didn't he? He tripped over before he got there. So, yeah.
Which
in fact, a bunch of us in India, we thought Albo is pronounced Albanese. I learned during this event that he goes by Albanese, which makes sense because he did look quite uneasy. So
yeah, he looked pretty strange on the Modi mobile. But the thing that I want to explore, we talked about it a little bit, the articles that came in the wake of this, particularly from Ram Guha. Gideon Haigh wrote quite a few pretty hard-hitting articles, but he's conveniently not, he's your traveling partner, he's conveniently not on Twitter. So does he pay you danger money for fronting up for all the abuse that you get from him or because of him?
People were running photographs of me and saying it was him. So, there was every chance that anyone who wanted to take vengeance on him would get me. Oh, look, we're pretty much in lockstep on that stuff. We discussed it before doing the podcast, and Gideon was very strong on the podcast as well. And look, he's not a guy who flies off the handle without dotting his I's and crossing his T's. And he did a lot of research for that article. In fact, he disappeared for about 36 hours into his room. And I kept, normally Gideon says, I'm just going to go and write my column. And about just after the door slams, the column drops into your inbox. In this case, it took 2 days. And I knew he was really working up to one. I mean, we obviously read widely anyway. We're both sort of interested in politics, and we couldn't help but be alert to some of the things that have been going on in India recently. I tell you what, the economic transformation is fantastic. Can I put in a positive word? Things have really, really changed in India. They're very noticeable, and even in the last decade. But obviously, I've been going there for 30 years. But the rise of the middle classes is something to behold. I mean, it has its downsides, but it's great to see so many people sort of living a more comfortable life these days.
Indeed.
Yeah,
if
good. In more uncomfortable circumstances, given the rise of pollution and the traffic. Yeah.
Indeed. One of the things that we discussed in the last episode was that Indore is known as one of the cleaner cities in India. But then we talked about that and said the bar is so low that it's easy for any city to be the cleanest city.
You get to Indore after Delhi and think, oh my God, I can breathe again. Thank God. But then after about 3 or 4 days, you realise it's the vanity of small differences. To be honest with you, that the road that our little sort of cheap and cheerful hotel was on, people would be sweeping it every morning, as you do in India. They sweep the roads, and of course, once they got the pile of leaves and sticks and rubbish, they set fire to it.
Yeah, they burn it.
So the street was clean, but the air was dirty. Really got to be a better system than that. But
exactly.
Yeah, little
Peter,
steps,
so
little
your
steps.
reflections on the tour itself, when we think about the cricket that happened, in the end, I guess it was if you look at it, is a good tour, a good cricket all around. But what are your reflections on the tour? What could Australia have done differently, better? What would they do differently if they travel, say, next year?
Look, I don't think that they do much differently to what they did. I think that their plans and their processes were good. They let themselves down in an hour in Delhi. They let themselves down similarly, I think, with a tentative start. But they didn't. They stuck to what they planned to do all along. Some things were foisted upon them, and some things were happy accidents. I think having Travis Head come in as an opener, it wasn't something that they pulled out of their back pocket when they were in India. That actually forewarned us that they might think about doing that with him in Asia. That might be a place for him to bat. That was a happy accident, and I think even as awful as it is to say, given the circumstances around it, but I think bowling Mitchell Starc instead of Pat Cummins in the last 2 tests was also a happy accident. But they stuck to their plans. They approached the game the way they wanted to approach it, except in those moments with those that hour in Delhi essentially cost them the series, in my mind. There were other little things. I mean, I think that probably the Kuhneman wasn't sort of, I think that was their 4th or 5th sort of, that was plan 5 in their bowling tactics, but he leapfrogged ahead of a few other bowlers who were on the tour.
Yep.
Todd Murphy, I mean, they'd been planning for that. They'd had him and Kuhneman on the A tour of Sri Lanka the year before, with very much this outcome in mind. So no, I don't think they'd have changed a lot. I think they're really, well, I know if I allow myself to take my journalist hat off and put on a fan's hat, that was the one they let get away. That's what will kill them for a long time. I said that about Head not getting the century on that practice wicket at the end. He'll really rue that, because centuries are hard to get in India. Everything's got to go your way, and getting a pitch that goes your way is the last thing you'll usually get. But That should eat away at the older ones in particular, and I think the Steve Smiths and those guys who've toured India many times and know how hard it is to just to win a test, let alone win a series. And it was there was a chance to win that series, and they let it slip.
Yeah. So Peter, basically, you're saying Australia acclimated well to India in Delhi by sweeping everything in the morning and setting fire to it. That's pretty much.
Yeah. Oh, look. It's a country that I don't know. I think we live in such a warm bath in the West. You guys are all in Australia, aren't you? You know how easy life is over here. But boy, oh boy, you get over there and the noise of those crowds and the heat. There's just this moment as a Westerner when you're in India for any protracted period of time where you look back and go, gee, I really lost my mind that day, hadn't I? It just got on top of me. I think it's the noise is something that is so different for Westerners, and it's not something that you're necessarily conscious of. I think you talked about Bharat before. Bharat's wife warned him when he moved to Adelaide to be prepared for something that you've never experienced before, and that's quiet. She said, and he said, I lay awake at night and I could hear my heart beating and I could hear myself breathing, and it was very disturbing. And he said something very sensible to me. He said, because we both have dogs, he says, if we took our dogs to India, they just die of overstimulation. I don't know. An Indian dog can lie down in the middle of 8 lanes of traffic and sleep like a cow does. It doesn't seem bothered by anything. But the dogs around here, they're so alert to sounds and things. Yeah. We're very similar. We're very alert to sounds, and we're not used to that. If you come from Australia or a sort of a place which is essentially a warm bath like that, and a quiet place, to India, where it's constant sound, constant noise, constant activity. You're always on edge. You're always your senses, whether you're aware of it or not, are always alert. And I think that's what got those Aussies. They said, "Oh, I just got to get another 100 runs."
It works the opposite way for us, right? Because we started this podcast in the Jan of last year. Still during lockdowns, etc., and India were playing in South Africa, and Kohli is like, it's too quiet. I'm getting Siraj and the 3 others on the bench to clap for us.
Well, I know my India mates come to Melbourne for the cricket, and they can't believe how god awful Melbourne is at Christmas time, because everybody's left, nothing's open, and so the Indian journos, they finish their work at 9, 10 o'clock at night and head out, because you've got those ridiculous eating hours that they keep, and everything's closed. All the chefs have gone home to bed. All the bars are sort of closing up, and it's like a ghost town. I think they find it quite unsettling, actually. That it's
No, great point about acclimatization that Tony mentioned also, right? Sweeping and setting fire to things. But on a serious note, Peter. I know Test cricket is sort of getting marginalized into the corners of the calendar now. Australia came into this tour without, warm-up game. They didn't even get to play on turners, not even at the nets, I think, before this series. Do you think they could have fared better if they'd got a little more time out there? I know the BCCI would not have given them the right kind of practice, and that's why they chose not to have a tour game also. But it looked like Australia were getting better through the course of the series, and maybe with a little more preparation, they could have actually nailed that hour at Delhi, and we might have had a different result. Yeah,
possibly, but it's not going to happen, is it? I mean, and look, what did they get? 6-7 days in Bangalore on pitches that they liked. They didn't get any preparation of Pakistan apart from a turning wicket in Melbourne. You're not going to get the time, and even when you had the time, would a month make you any better, or would it wear you down more? Would it just be another month away from home? I think there's sort of there's an economic principle to that, isn't there, about reducing returns? I don't know what it is. I'm an art student, but
diminishing returns.
Diminishing, that's right.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Not sure, but anyway, that's what it is, and that's the way tours are going to be from now on, and that's why it's going to be good to play India in a warm-up game for the Ashes, isn't it, in the World Test Championship?
That'll be good. It happened the other way around last time. New Zealand had just finished an entire tour in England and then played the World Test Championship, and India had come from, I think, an IPL tournament or something like that.
As they always tend to.
Yeah, well, both sides will essentially be coming from an IPL tournament this time, won't they? True. I think it's less than a week some of them will have for the turnaround if they make the finals. Be interesting to see if Australia doesn't lean on some of its players to make an early exit, perhaps get one of those niggles. But
Yeah.
I don't know with the Ambanis paying all that money to Green, whether we can get him out early. But it'd be a bit like Saving Private Ryan. They got to keep that kid safe.
That's
Not that I've seen that film. I read about it.
Yeah. Good one.
Tony, do you want to?
Yeah. So just briefly wanted to explore around the captains that we've seen in the last few BGTs, right? And I think Tim Payne has just called it quits as we speak. And Steve Smith really sort of turned up for the last 2 tests, right? Your take on, sort of captains for Australia in the past few years, and if Pat Cummins is going to be there on the job for a fairly longish time, and what were your impressions of his captaincy as opposed to Steve Smith's?
I think Pat signaled very early on, at least I know I've heard him say this, I don't know if he said it publicly, but anyway, that he reckons that you've got a life expectancy of a captain and it's maybe 4 years. It might be even shorter when you're a fast bowler. Let's wait and see. I think what the Border Gavaskar Trophy highlighted, and with the unfortunate death of his mother and him having to return home for the last 2 tests, was that Steve is that the one real issue you're going to have as a fast bowling captain is in spinning conditions and with spinners. I think it's that test documentary, the second one. I watched a bit of it recently, and I saw Pat studying at the computer on how to set fields for spinners. I mean, fast bowlers, having a gasping down at fine leg when all that stuff goes on, and they don't bother themselves about it. Smithy, like a David Warner or a Marnus Labuschagne, has got that busy mind. It's obsessed with cricket. It's obsessed with gaining an edge, looking for an advantage, just trying to find. I don't think their minds ever really switch off from the game. And I think the very fact that he sits at first slip, that he has a mind like that he's spent his whole life in the slip cordon. So he's watched the spin when there has been spin bowling in Australian cricket. He's watched it or he's faced it. That he is better suited to spin bowling. I think he's having said that, he's a very good deputy for Pat to have, because I think the best quality that you can have in a deputy is that they don't want to be captain again. And Smith's made it very clear publicly that my time's passed. I'll do it. I'll love it when I've got it, but I don't want to do it. So he really put in. I think he lifted for those last couple of tests, and he did a brilliant job. But I think that's probably the single flaw that you'll find with a fast bowling captain is they're not in a position to, and I don't think that they are predisposed to captaining when the spinners are on. It might be all right when Nathan Lyon's bowling in Australia, because you move that fielder and you move that fielder, and every 4 overs
and everything works.
But those first 3 tests were essentially played at T20 pace, weren't they? Every ball was critical. You had you couldn't let things drift for 4 deliveries really, because the game could start to slip from you in that shorter space of time. So it was great to watch Smith do it. And I like Steve Smith, and I understand why Australian cricket didn't go back to him, because I think, every time there'd be a sideways look on the field, it would go back to being seen through that old prism, that Cape Town prism, which is tedious. And I actually thought when he was captain that he was probably better suited to being a batter than a captain. But I'm not so sure about that now. So I understood why they bypassed him, and I understood why they've gone for Pat too. He's an articulate, intelligent and sensitive guy, and the sort of guy for the situation I think that Australian cricket found itself in when Tim face planted so badly before the Ashes. I mean, we'd lost 2 captains in very quick succession amidst sort of terrible scandals, hadn't we? One very tawdry scandal, and another one that kind of rocked the nation. Pat had a calming influence there, brought his university degree and his nice big smile and his bright blue eyes, and all the girls love him, and all the right-wing nut jobs hate him, which makes me love him even more. So,
There's something else to explore there. I think Nitin is going to ask you something else there. But one thing that I would point you to is Ashwin's YouTube channel. He talks very, very highly of Steve Smith's captaincy. By the way, when Ashwin's not bowling, he's making YouTube videos.
He's fantastic at it too. He's very good at it. He's a very entertaining guy, Ashwin. He's not the most loved member by the opposition players, but still, he's got a bit of spark to him that I like.
Not. One other thing that I would say is that under Cummins, I think this Australian team has actually become quite lovable as well. The team itself presents itself in a much more lovable way, if you like.
That's just because you're a lefty, Mohan.
But there was zero stump mic chatter this series, I think.
Very little. They were actually
also true.
friendly.
Yeah. I talked about it. Yeah. I remember I was on that 2017 tour, and it was a stink fest. Frankly, it was disgusting, and they get really tedious to cover. You know, you just like in it. You don't mind a good yarn now and then, but constant sort of ugly battles between the two teams do wear you down. I mean, because you're right about cricket because you love cricket, and I like both sides. I'm a big fan of Kohli. He's one of my favourite players in the world, but to constantly be talking about this blow up on the field, that blow up on the field, that rubbish with Smith and the DRS, which in retrospect I'm far more suspicious of than I was at the time. And at the end of that 27 series, who was captaining? Was it Rahul?
Kohli. It was Kohli and Smith, right?
Rahane.
Yeah.
Because Kohli had injured himself,
Yeah, but Kohli was there, and of course his presence loomed large, and that was height of angry Kohli, as it always came out when Australia were around. The Australians went to Rahul and said, let's have a drink after the last test in Dharamshala. He said, oh yeah, I'll get back to you. We're doing our warm down. And one can only assume he said it to Virat, and Virat said, not on your life. And when they finished their warm down, the Aussies were waiting on the balcony of their dressing room for a signal. They got on the bus and they just left. Cello, nothing. And look, I didn't blame them. It had been such an ugly tour. And Kohli finished that tour. He started the tour by saying, I've got friends in the Aussie dressing room. Correct. He finished it by saying, I don't anymore. Cricket shouldn't be like that. It's a bloody game. Yeah. So it was really good to see the way they played it this time. If someone got beaten by a really good ball, they kind of acknowledged it. Batters were upset when they were dismissed, and bowlers became frustrated. I don't mind that at all. Sometimes bowlers can blow up, especially fast bowlers. It's hard work, and you've got to be angry, but only in the moment, not this relentless ugliness that sort of marked Australian cricket. And I think Virat tapped into it too with Indian cricket to a degree, but he's matured, and I think he signalled that when he asked the crowd at the Oval to stop abusing Steve Smith. That was a wonderful gesture, and he's much mellower man now. So are the Australians. I think they've seen the error of their ways, and they're more mellow.
Yeah. In fact, on that note, there has been a lot of chatter about the pitches, right, on this tour. And let's state it up front. The pitches in the first 3 test matches were quite strange, and the third one, I think, was a bit of a travesty. We didn't hear anything from the players. The players actually put up with it fairly well, right? They didn't really talk about the pitches. But we wanted to ask you about the take in the Australian media about the pitches, right? And there's a lot of, puff of dust narratives. In fact, Ashwin talks about it in his most recent video in a slightly mocking way.
Puff of dust came in the morning of the match. Puff of dust came in the morning of the match. Puff of dust Puff of dust came in the morning of the match. Puff of dust Tennis ball pata kuda puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Tennis ball pata kuda puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Wicket மண்ணில தான் பண்றாங்க. ஒரு சில இடம் கொஞ்சம் ட்ரையா இருந்ததுன்னா பால் பட்ட உடனே puff of dust வரதான் செய்யும். Puff of dust வரதான் செய்யும். Puff of dust வரதான் செய்யும். Tennis ball pata kuda puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Tennis ball pata kuda puff of dust varum. Tennis ball pata kuda puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Puff of dust varum. Puff of dust na enna? Puff of dust varum. Puff of dust na enna? Puff of dust varum.
But yeah, the whole puff of dust, the victim mentality, the siege mindset around pitches and how the Australian media perceives it. I'm sure that's what said back home. So there's a bit of a narrative that's peddled, about the Orientalism of the pitches, for want of a better word, and so on. But what's your take on the pitches? And yeah,
personally, I like the pitches and the cricket they create. When I report on them, I report on what's going on and the fact that that the BCCI have a head of curators who flies in and then discusses with and appears to discuss with the coach, with Dravid, what sort of pitch they want, and that's going to be a pitch that turns from day one these days, isn't it? Because I think there's even a greater pressure on India to win because of the World Test Championship and this whole confluence of politics with the BCCI these days. It's just become so intertwined. I mean, these are realities. I mean, these are undeniable realities that this happens, and this is fascinating to it. This is like readers love this stuff, so you report on it, and it's legitimate to report on it. And people will say you're whinging or, you're setting up a victim mentality. Well, you're not. You're reporting on the very facts of the situation. And those first 2 wickets were rated below average, and the third was rated poor. So, that was backed up by the experience. And look, you can criticize. I criticize them on these grounds. I criticize them on the fact that, well, there's half a criticism involved in countries going that far is a bit over the top. It's a little too far to win a match, to make sure that conditions are so utterly hostile that in fact they become hostile to your own batsman. Would you like to be a batsman in an Indian cricket team now? Would you like to be a fan who tries to get tickets for the afternoon of day 3 or day 4 or, God forbid, day 5? And equally, broadcasters, I wonder how it affects them. They are basically the first 3 tests. They only got half the content that they paid for. That costs a lot of money in broadcasting terms. But I love watching cricket on pitches where 40 or 50 is a good score. It just makes for fascinating cricket. But it also makes for a fascinating story. But I'm not complaining about those things, but I am pointing them out.
Peter, let's just explore that a little bit more, right? Oh, are you there?
No, I am.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that India travel well, when much better now than they did in the 90s. We, Tony, Nitin, myself, and lots of people in the WhatsApp group suffered through the 90s when we thought we had a wonderful cricket team, but the results didn't bear that out at all, right? And that's simply because India traveled very, very poorly. And now, compared to that, I think as a team, India travels quite well. Now,
it's easier to bat when you're away. Look at the wickets you have to bat on at home.
Exactly.
If you've got batters of the quality of the Indian batters,
exactly,
you want to see them on wickets where you can actually survive.
Actually supply them, and then actually they can bat well. The flip side of that is that what India did was actually invested in pitches that offered bounce and movement and all that sort of stuff. There's a pitch, Nitin will correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's called Lali or something like that, where the top score on a particular day might be 150 or something like that. Green top, ball fizzing around. There's in the north of India, Haryana. So there's that. There's Mohali, which offers bounce. There's a few other pitches that
Dharamshala, of course.
Dharamshala, of course.
In fact, this series could have taken a very different course if the third test had happened in Dharamshala as was planned. Because clearly they didn't have time to prepare the indoor pitch properly. Right? Whatever they tried there backfired to some extent.
The first class cricket's very different to the test cricket. The pitches
is also
in India.
Indeed. But the flip side here is what would it take? And it's probably a good preparation for Australians as well. You can drop in a dust bowl if you want to into, let's say, Albury or Wodonga or Bendigo or someplace else like Gold Coast or something like that, and make that your spin pitch for players to get acclimatized to subcontinent type conditions, right?
They've done it. They've done it. They've got one at the academy, or what's left of the academy up in They've got a subcontinental wicket, which I always find a bit odd because if you go across the subcontinent doesn't exactly have uniform wickets, does it? But I think what they mean is an Indian raging turner. I don't know if it's the red clay or the black clay. That was
Black clay,
something that I'd never really discerned the difference between those two wickets before this series. But the curators were presenting a red one and a black one to the coach before a couple of days out from the test to see which one they wanted to choose.
So, Peter, is that at the Alan Border Oval or at the Academy itself?
Well, it'd be out the back at Alan Border. Yeah, the Alan Border. Alan Border is at the Academy, and I think there are
next
wickets
door,
out the back. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that might be the place where there might be some acclimatization, so that day one of the test, when the ball is turning, you're just used to it, anyways, right? So
yeah, the Aussies, they just looked uptight or something at the start of that test, didn't they? Like Pat Cummins, his first two spells were as bad as I've ever seen him bowl. I think they'd worked themselves up a lot for that series, and they just got off on the wrong foot. But, it's pretty hard to start at full steam, isn't it? I even find that with journalism, you're writing better by the second and third test than you are in the first. Then it all turns to crap in the fourth. Yeah. Can't write no.
Peter, you mentioned you've been coming to India for 30 years and you've seen like an explosion in terms of at least middle class well-offness. But I think another thing that would have changed, that you'd have noticed, is in the variety of beer that is now available in India. Right. And
absolutely.
As much as we love cricket, we also love a good beer. So, you are famous across the world as the journalist who paid an insane amount of money for a single beer. In fact, when I was looking you up on Google, there even came up a Hindi site which had the headline, Kel Patrakar se hotel ne charge kiya beer ka 50 lakh rupiya. I mean, Hindi is not my native language either, but I was amazed at how much they went into the actual conversion of the currency from
4 lakh, did you say? Was it 4 lakh, did you
say?
Yeah. 50 lakhs.
50 lakhs.
50 lakhs, Chaz. Oh, gosh.
But anyway, I wanted to ask you about your experience of beer in India. Has that changed? And also, I'm sure you have quite a few beer yarns that we'd love to hear from you about.
In fact, before Peter goes into that, Australia is known for 99.94, which is Bradman's average. It's also known for $99,983.64, which is what Peter paid for his beer in Manchester one fine night. But yeah, over to you, Peter.
Yeah, so tipped it over the 100 once I got the bank charges on top. I think it was $2,000 worth of bank charges.
Overthrows.
Well,
that's exactly what Bradman should have done. He should have got an overthrow or something like that.
I first noticed the beer revolution in India in when was the last tour? 2017, wasn't it? Down in Bangalore. The first test we were over there where the orange people come from, Pune. And not Donald Trump. I mean the Rajneeshis. And there was a rooftop brewery there whose name escapes me at the moment, but quite good beer, not bad. Then we went to Bangalore, and Bangalore had, at least back then, I think it had 3 craft beer cafes. It's probably got plenty more now.
Probably 300 now.
Yeah, it'd be like a bit like Marrickville. I think we've got 17 within walking distance of my house. Then, of course, this Bira product came up in the interim as well, which is obviously a big brewery passing itself off as a craft beer, but good luck to them. They what really fascinated me is the love of white beer, of Belgian wit beers and wheat beers. Something that I used to love years ago, and I sort of went through a phase of going over to the German club near my house and drinking Erdinger over there. And I noticed now that a lot of pubs in India have Erdinger on tap.
Right.
The Bira makes a wit beer, and toward the end there, I noticed even Kingfisher are making a wit beer to try and keep up. The beer's cold, which is fantastic. If only they could just find some quiet pubs in Delhi. Why does every pub have to be a bloody nightclub? You go out for a quiet beer and all you get is doof, doof, doof. Yeah. They've got a...
Bangalore has got some really nice elite places. No, I wouldn't say elite, but quite boutique places as well that serve some good beer, but in quiet settings. But I shouldn't be talking. I'm in Australia. Nitin's
most of
in Dubai, but originally from Bangalore.
No, in Bangalore also, most of them are very noisy, and it's quite painful. In fact,
Indians get nervous when it's quiet. Isn't that right?
We can't handle silence.
The beer situation is fantastic, and look, my eyes lit up when I was in Indore, and right at the end of our little Cheap and Cheerful was a pub called Hobnobs. I think it's a chain over there. And they had Cooper's Pale and Cooper's Vintage and Cooper's Stout. The Pale was ridiculously stale, and in fact, I've got to send a message to Cooper's to tell them not that they need to keep an eye on their beer in India because it was out of date by about a year. But the Stout was really good, really good. It cost me nearly as much as that beer in Manchester, I might add. Gee, those middle class establishments in India really know how to charge money these days, don't they? Yeah, got to be on one of those. You got to be one on those big wages. Yeah. Not a journalist wage, I can add.
Peter, we're going to go a little listically on you. And if you can tell us your top 3 favorite beers in India that you like to drink.
In India, my top 3 favorite beers. Well, I liked the wheat beer, so that is the Bira White.
Yeah, that's right.
I've got a soft spot in my heart, especially if you're at altitude and you have the Kingfisher strong beer. It's fantastic. Yeah. You feel like you're in Shiva's cave. You're that high from 2 of those. What's third? There was you've got me now, because there was in Nagpur, which is what a great city Nagpur is these days. Gee, that's lifted from the first time we were there in 2004. It's really lifted. There is when you come in from the airport and turn left, on your right hand side, there's a craft beer cafe there. I don't know the name of it. It made a very nice red ale. I'm sorry, I forget.
Oh wow,
that's nice. That's nice.
But anyway, if you're coming in from the airport, you turn left onto the main street of Nagpur. Under the double viaduct, longest viaduct in the world, double viaduct in the world. And the metro and the metro line that they put on top of it is excellent service. It's as good a public transport as I've used anywhere in the world.
Yeah,
brand new, really friendly, gets you around. But anyway, one stop down, I reckon, on the metro. You get off and there's a little craft brew pub on your right. It's very nice.
So this is really nice. So you stocked up on all the beer and all the beer stories, and then trained into Ahmedabad, which is completely dry. That was another. Well done.
Just like the series itself, it
was funny though. I didn't crave a beer at all when I got there. I kind of just got into the vibe of the town, and it was a pretty strict vibe. Right at the end, I cracked, and I thought I'll go down and get I've actually got it here. My drinking permit, application for tourist permit for alcohol, so I could have a beer at the end. Yeah. It's easier to get a beer in Pakistan than it is to get a beer in Ahmedabad. Way easier. You've actually got to have your the boarding pass from when you arrive on the. It doesn't matter that you've got your passport that says you're in India. It doesn't matter that you're actually in Ahmedabad. You've got to have a boarding pass that says that you're in Ahmedabad. You've got to have a letter from your hotel. You've got to have your passport. You've got to get a code back from the government on your phone that you've got to verify with. The whole process takes about 45 minutes. And while you're there,
Peter, you just said that it's easier to get beer in Pakistan than it is in Ahmedabad. I think you just won the keys to the city or something like that.
Yeah. They'd be proud of that, wouldn't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They would.
We were stuck in Lahore. This time last year, I was stuck in Lahore with Bharat Sundaresan and Melinda Farrell for about 4 weeks in the Pearl Continental Hotel, which fortunately had the only bar in Lahore on the second floor. So
thank goodness.
those long gaps between one-day games, I played a lot of pool.
Yeah. Did you get close to David Boone's 52 by any chance?
I'm not a big drinker. I talk a good drink, but I don't drink a lot, to be honest with you. No.
Good stuff. For the record, I don't think any of us, Mohan, Tony, and myself, have been to Nagpur. I've not been to Nagpur, so you're probably so we're hearing about it from you.
But as I tell any Indian who criticizes my knowledge of India, I've been to more of India than you guys. All of you. Absolutely. I've seen more of it. Probably read more about it.
Yeah. But for the record, next time you're in Ahmedabad, it's a little difficult to get beer there. In fact, it's very difficult to get beer there, but you can always call someone to get hard liquor. And the bootleggers don't deal with beer too much because it's not worth the risk, but hard liquor is available. Yeah.
I figured there'd be a black market because down in the car park at the Pearl Continental in Lahore, there was a thriving black market in alcohol, but we were paying about 5 times the price up in up in the hotel bar. But yeah, it's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Peter,
There were local people coming in using a fingerprint system to get their drinks. I don't know if they were registered alcoholics or friends of the... No, seriously, friends of the government or what, but they would come in and there was a fingerprint machine. They'd put their thumb on it and they would carry out bags of grog. I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to take photos because photos are banned in the liquor store.
Okay.
Unless they are photos of Narendra Modi, but
yeah. So Peter, you come across something that many of us have wanted to ask you. You come across as a left-leaning. I wouldn't go as far as saying extreme left or rabble rouser or something like that. But you do come across.
I would.
You would. Okay. but what? How does it compute with you being in a sports writer in the Australian? Stay woke, exactly right. But so for the listeners, Peter just put up a poster that says "Stay woke." But how does it work with that? And how do you work within the Australian, which has got a certain readership, a certain audience, and a certain type of material that
it's an extremely conservative paper with an extremely conservative agenda, and it's shameless about it, and its politics certainly are at odds with me on most things. Mm-hmm. If I read something on the op-ed pages of the Australian that I agreed with, I'd probably faint. But that's their right. That's what they do. I work in the cricket section and I write about cricket, and I'm allowed to say what I think in those pages. Obviously we don't write about politics much in cricket, but as much as we can. They've never stopped me. They've never reined me in from my political views on social media, which are pretty strident, I must say, and pretty much sort of diametrically opposed to most of theirs. But they've got to keep me there, because if Philip Adams dies, they won't have any lefties. I'm kind of the backup for Philip Adams. I'll probably get his column when he goes, so mm-hmm. They can say, well, we've still got a lefty columnist somewhere, and they'll dust me off. Yeah.
So Peter, for people who don't know Philip Adams or stuff about that, he's quite a well thought out, scholarly kind of person. Does ABC radio as well on top of writing for the Australian. And you, Peter, you don't write just about cricket, right? So you write when the AFL season is on. You write about the AFL as well. Sometimes I read something about Buddy Franklin. Was it last year that you wrote about his 100th game and so on? Yeah.
I try not to, because I don't want my job to ruin all of the things I love, and I only love two sports, and it's cricket and Australian rules footy. So I like to be able to go to the football and have a drink and cheer, rather than sit in a press box
and write about it. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, because I don't get to enjoy many games of cricket, really. Not in that way, anyway.
Yeah. Peter, we wanted to ask you about match fixing, right? You've been around the block for a really long period of time, including...
I got accused of being a bookie when I paid $101,000 for a beer. There was a little riff running around Indian cricket fans that he's clearly a bookie. Yeah.
Wow, because he could afford a beer that expensive. It all makes sense. But take us back to, when it first happened. I guess in Australian cricket, the first murmurs were when Mark Waugh and Shane Warne, shared information, and Salim Malik's whole controversy broke out. At least in India, we believe that, the naivete of journalists, or maybe even the partial, selective silence of journalists played a role in the spread of match fixing, right? I don't think it was the same in Australia, but we wanted to get your views on fixing. And how does it feel to have covered, certain games in a certain way, and later to find out that, those games were actually tainted, and some of the heroes we spoke about were up to mischief in the background?
Yeah, I wasn't. I was just a sort of ordinary run-of-the-mill journalist when that went down. I obviously talked to Malcolm and the Crash and some of the guys, and to Mike Coward and some of the guys who were around when that Hansy thing went down. And I think that they were pretty similar to my reaction as a fan and somebody at a distance from the game. It was just disbelief, absolute disbelief. It took me, at first I just thought, this is wrong. the Indian police have got this wrong. And, I very soon realized I got it wrong. The Indian police had this right. That was stunning to us. That was going on there. There'd always been, hints around those little tournaments in Sharjah that went on. There were a couple of those where peculiar things happened, but nobody was sure. Nobody really knew. I think even recently around spot fixing, that was a shock, wasn't it? With Mohammed Amir and those guys in that in the test in England.
In England,
and nobody. I mean, you looked at it, really, in a test match they've done this. Maybe I'm naive on this stuff. I don't know much about it. It's outside of our our sphere, our understanding, our knowledge. We sit in a press box and cover games and go to training. I mean, people might say to you sometimes that this game or that game, that looked a bit odd, but gee, I saw Australia collapse in an hour in Delhi. That looked a bit odd too, didn't it? You can read anything you want into matches. I don't know. I'm not sure that I have covered games that there's been fixing involved. I don't know that. I know I've covered games where people have later turned out to be crooked and to be found to be on the tape, or at least susceptible to being on the tape, which was really the situation with that Pakistan setup. It was quite a shock to read about some of the guys in New Zealand. I forget the second guy's name now, who's been very forthcoming about it and how he slipped
Lou
into
Vincent,
it.
right? Yeah, Lou Vincent,
Yeah.
right?
Well done. Yeah, well done. Thanks, Nitin. Thank God someone's got a memory. I'm hopeless without Gideon around. That was a terrible tale, wasn't it, of a man in depression and sort of fun,
Just incredibly bad.
Yeah, I must admit, it's not one of my strong points, match fixing. It's not one I know much about. I kind of know the big events. I sat with a very interesting guy. I won't say which. He was actually a very senior member of the BCCI, and had dinner with him the other night. He told me stories of his time in a BCCI that would make your blood run cold about notable players who've never been mentioned before. I don't know if he was big noting at a dinner or not. I don't think he was. Things have always gone on, haven't they? But I don't know. It's just not in my purview, as that somebody says in the thick of it and gets ridiculed for. Yeah.
And as perhaps as a cricket romantic, you probably want to not believe that sort of stuff exists, and you might want to just say, no, I'm not going to.
Well, I only cover test match cricket too. I don't know how much of it gets in at that level anymore. It's pretty tight at that level, isn't it? It tends to happen on the peripheries more these days, doesn't it, in the leagues? Yeah.
Peter, we'll one or two final questions before we wind up, because we know you have to go somewhere else. When you're critical of a player, and sometimes you need to be, how does that then come back? Is it daunting for you? Is the cricketer's response to you different after you write about them in particular? And I want to anchor this in we don't necessarily need to talk too deeply about it, but if you go back to 2008 and your pieces on Harbhajan and all that sort of stuff, you're quite critical of what happened then around.
Yeah, I was. I still am. I still am. Yeah, yeah.
How does that reflect on your future? How does it intersect with your future framing and articles and access and approach to a player like, let's say, Harbhajan, but anyone else that you've been supremely harsh and critical of?
Look, it's the rarest of journalists that has good connections with the Indian cricket team. They live in their own satellite, and they don't sort of deign to indulge the media that often. But some do have very good relationships. Bharat, obviously, Sundaresan has some great relationships, and there's some of the guys at Cricinfo, some of the more senior guys over the years who've developed relationships. But they're a tough nut to crack, and for an overseas journo, it's almost, I don't think I've ever had a relationship with anybody in the Indian team. But I mean, having said that, Ravi Shastri is a great mate of mine. We're very close friends. And in fact, I remember in 2008, Ravi coming up to me and said, "Peter, I hate what you write. but gee, I like the way you write it. And we were friends, and we've been friends, very close friends ever since. I suppose I can relate it more to the Australian team, because obviously I roam with them. I live in the same hotels overseas as them. I spend a lot of time watching them in the nets. This is a very, very approachable group, this one. They've never been a more approachable and friendly and guards down Australian team than this one, with the media and with fans, which is good. They're not frightened or spooked by the media. But in the summer, I was extremely outspoken about the future of David Warner on Channel 7 and in TV. But to give David Warner his due, he gets it, and most of the sensible, mature cricketers understand that if they're not making runs, they'll be criticised. You don't like to have to do it. You feel sick when you start saying, look, this is the end of somebody's career, because that's a huge thing. You're ejecting somebody out of the greatest moment of their life, of something they've devoted their life to for a long time. And I'm one of the last journos to ever call for anybody's head or say their time's up. I'm left liberal soft, I'm soft as. I always want to give them one more test or think that they might come right. I always thought Ricky Ponting was going to come good. I didn't really, but I could see he was gone, but I could see the reasons why they kept him on. With David, I don't think that David should go to the Ashes. And I like David Warner a lot. I admire him as a person and as a cricketer, but I think his time's done, and I'd like him to make that call. But I'm glad I'm not a selector on that front. Yeah.
And I think there was perhaps Glenn Maxwell as well at one point in time. There were a couple of things you wrote.
Possibly. Look, no, there was. I know. I was writing Aaron Finchoff 12 months ago.
It's true.
Maybe it was 2 years ago. Very strong, saying he's in real trouble here. He had a string of really low scores. He looked terrible.
Getting LBW quite a bit.
Yeah, and he was supposed to have an eye operation. He hadn't had it, but I knew that in the background and wasn't allowed to write it. And I just wrote, oh, his time's up. It looks like he's got to move on. There's a World Cup coming up. They've got to get rid of Finch. I was wrong. He came good. And I remember the night he came good. I don't know, they're playing in Sri Lanka or somewhere. I was lying on the couch and he got to 50. My phone went, I got a message from one of his relatives saying, isn't it great? He got 50. And I think, I thought you'd abuse me. I thought I'd be the last person in the world to talk to. And I said, no, we understand. He was going like crap. You called it out, You can't argue with the facts of the situation.
That's wonderful.
There are parts of the media that jump in, the first time somebody fails, they want them sacked, or the first time they look them sideways, they want them disciplined. I don't think they travel with the team. I don't think they develop, it's hard not to develop sympathies with them as human beings when you see them up close so often and you see how much work they put in, and you know them as people, and their foibles, it's you kind of, it's not as bad as being their parent. You watch their parents in the crowd and you think that must be the worst thing in the world, to be the parent of a cricketer, to go through their ups and downs. But you don't feel anxious for them, but you do feel some sort of sympathy for them or empathy for them.
Wonderful.
Lovely.
Okay. I think we are almost at time. We'll just close with a quick few rapid fire questions, if that's okay. Peter, your favorite Indian city?
Bagsunat. Oh, does that have to be a city? That's a village.
That's okay. No, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Where is that? You'll need to tell us.
It's above McLeod Ganj, which is above Dharamshala. It was a little shepherd's village where I used to stay when I was younger. Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, what's it called again? Sorry.
Bagsunat. I probably say it wrong.
Okay.
Baghsu.
As we have established on this podcast, you've traveled to India far more than some of us. So thanks for telling us.
Okay. Favorite Indian crowd at a stadium?
Favorite Indian crowd at a stadium?
Favorite stadium will do, if that's too tough.
You've pulled down all my favorite stadiums. I used to like the old one at Nagpur, and I like the CCI, but that's not a stadium anymore, is it?
That's right.
Oh no,
Well,
it's got to be.
It is. The Brabant still hosts games. Yeah.
I think all the Modi's friends and families, day one at the Narendra Modi Stadium. That's my favourite. That's my favourite ever.
Okay, which as a journalist would you want to write less about? Steve Smith's brain fade or Marinus Labuschagne's toasty in the pocket?
Oh God, you know how many times we write about those people, you know. Peter and I sit there and go, he fidgets, you know. Yes, he fidgets, you know.
Future captain though, isn't he? Surely.
Hey, I like Smith's brain fades. I'm intrigued by Steve Smith's brain. I'm intrigued by Steve Smith. I don't think I'll ever completely figure him out.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, Ravi Shastri the coach, Ravi Shastri the commentator, or Ravi Shastri the museum tour guide? Which do you think is...
Sorry, that's my Delhi cough.
Oh fuck!
Yeah, shocking. All three incarnations of Ravi Shastri are wondrous and are to be worshipped and praised.
You've gone back with more than a cough from India, Peter. Gotten with the program.
He's a great man, Ravi. He was a fantastic coach. I mean, to pull off those 2 wins in Australia was something really significant, and it wasn't a coincidence that it was Ravi that did that. The Ravi Shastri who came to Australia as a young man and kind of went, I like the way they play cricket down here. I want to play with that aggression. You know, I want to take these pricks on. And, you know, to come back 30 years later and he did that innings in Sydney and at that in that one-day tournament, the Champion of Champions thing.
84.
But to come back 30 years later as a coach, or however many years later it was, and to imbue in your side that attitude of don't ever take a backward step to these pricks. You know, if they poke their finger into your chest, you poke 2 fingers back into their chest. That's the only way they'll respect them. And to give those guys that belief, that sense of you can do anything, even to, you know, Siraj when he was going through that grief, and, you know, he was essentially a net bowler, wasn't he? You know, they were there as extras on the tour by the end, that bowling lineup. To do what he did, that was fantastic. I'm a huge fan of him.
That makes 2 of us.
Tony is an unabashed Ravi Shastri fan, and
good on you. Yes,
Tony is the chairman,
great person too. Yeah.
Tony is the chairman of the Ravi Shastri fan club.
Oh, are you really? Yeah,
card carrying member.
Okay, I'm the #1 ticket holder of the foreign branch. Yeah.
Nice.
On that note, maybe we should let you go, Peter. You got a whole bunch of other things to go to. Maybe drink some beer in the Miracle pub or whatever. But thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We talked about cricket. We talked about beer. We talked about traveling and touring in India. We talked about Ravi Shastri. We talked about a whole bunch of things, including cricket writing and so on. It's been fascinating. It's been fun. It's been enjoyable. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you so much, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Peter.
gentlemen. Nice way to spend Sunday, Arvo. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Right.
So that was Bits and Pieces episode 63 with Peter
64.
64, is it? 60, whatever, something.
Good.
All right then. Thanks, guys. I better run.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.